Hi, welcome back to Digital Defense. I am Jordan Robertson, your host. We are broadcasting live, as we always do, from Bloomberg News, Washington, D.C. Bureau. This is our weekly cybersecurity show, and as always, for those of you who've seen the show already, you already know this. This is an audience-driven show, so while we have the topic of the day, we want and encourage you to write in with your questions wherever you may be watching this show. The topic today, we'll just jump right in, is some strict new rules in China and Russia regarding the use of VPNs. I've gotten a number of viewer questions regarding VPNs, and I wanted to dive into it this week because there are these really strict new rules in China and Russia regarding VPNs that are going to go into effect really shortly here. So I wanted to introduce the topic of VPNs to those of you who may not be aware of what exactly the goal of that technology is, but also talk about some really practical limitations that you may not be aware of. I'm a cybersecurity reporter here for Bloomberg, so I talk to a lot of folks whose job it is to break technologies like VPNs. So I want to give you hopefully some comprehensive guidance about what you should and maybe shouldn't be doing in regard to this technology. But again, we welcome all audience questions. So we're broadcasting live on Facebook and Periscope, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Terminal. So wherever you're watching this, please feel free to send in some questions. So let's just jump right in. Within the last couple of weeks, Vladimir Putin, obviously on the right, and President Xi Jinping of China have imposed some really tough new rules on internet security. And those rules cover VPNs. So again, this show is grounded in the idea that you don't have to be a cybersecurity expert to take some very basic steps to protect yourself online. And for a long time, VPNs have been one of the kind of the marquee recommendations for cybersecurity experts for how people can help anonymize themselves online. And I want to give you a basic overview of what a VPN is and why these new rules in China and in Russia are so potentially problematic from a privacy and security standpoint. So many of you will already know this, but a VPN is a virtual private network. And all that is basically is you sign up for a service. The best ones do cost. There are free versions, but those are not necessarily the best. They do cost. Basically what it is you log into a website. Your computer will connect to another computer that then connects to the internet. It's basically just adding a layer of anonymization between you and your internet provider. And it does a couple of things when you do that. Again, these are mostly paid services. So what you do is you install software on your computer or you log in through your web browser. And when you surf the internet, you're not surfing as you. You are surfing as an agent of whatever VPN service you're using. So in principle, this is a very important tool to anonymize your communications, because one of the ways that intelligence services and hackers track individuals is they fingerprint your machine, they fingerprint your computer, and when they see that computer online, your internet provider knows a whole lot about what you do online. Regular viewers of the show will know that. The internet provider, they handle every single request that you make to the internet, and they have visibility into basically everything you're doing. If you disguise that traffic through a VPN, again, this is not illegal in most places, China and Russia soon to be notwithstanding, that's just an important layer of saying, I'm not going to access the internet from my home computer. I'm going to access it via a third-party systems. Here's the problem with that. For countries like Russia and China, what that allows people to do, and has allowed people to do, is circumvent existing surveillance and censorship systems. So one of the reasons that so many people in China have been able to access the internet freely, is through the use of VPNs. China has had a pretty complicated relationship with this technology. China, as most people know, runs a technology called the Great Firewall of China. And this is one of the sites that I encourage people to go to if you suspect that your traffic may be blocked in China. It's just a basic tool that shows you is your site blocked. And this is the way that the Great Firewall works, and people can use a VPN to get around it. So if you're in China, you can't access Twitter and Google and Facebook and all these sites via the regular internet because those URLs are blocked. A VPN will take your traffic out of the country, let's say to the US, and then to those websites where you can access them. So obviously a very valuable tool, but one that if you live in a country like Russia or China, where there is heavy censorship and surveillance of the internet, this is a big problem. But part of the reason, just very quickly, that China and Russia have both had such a complicated relationship with this technology, you might just say, if this technology allows you to subvert censorship, why don't they just block it? Problem is this: every business of any size uses VPNs for workers to access systems remotely. If you ban VPNs, you basically ban international travel and international business. So that's not what they want to do. However, what these latest moves show is that these countries are taking much stronger steps to block individuals from using VPNs and accessing banned content. Wow, we're getting some great questions here, so I'm going to get to these right now. First question here is, what does this mean for people from other countries visiting Russia and China? It's a very good question, one that I was looking into myself. So, you know, I think there's a practical matter, and then there's also there's a letter of the law, and then there's like a practical advice. If you're visiting Russia or China and you use an existing VPN service, you know, I wouldn't expect that you would disembark the plane and get arrested and have handcuffs slapped on you when you try to log in. That's not the way these systems work. The way these systems work is much more insidious. You know, basically the reason people in both of these countries have been able to access the internet through VPNs is the governments have allowed them to. They've turned a blind eye because there is extraordinary value in allowing business travelers and businesses in those countries to use these tools. What these surveillance and censorship systems can do, however, is they can block the URL for whatever VPN you're using. They can even block the IP addresses of those VPN services. So if you land in China or you land in Russia, and once these rules go into effect, and you're using a popular VPN that is on the blacklist, and you know, almost all of these will be on the blacklist, you're just going to find yourself unable to access that service via your computer. And that is through some pretty sophisticated filtering mechanisms that these countries have decided to implement. So that means maybe you're able to get on, maybe you're not. It depends on where physically you're going to be located in those countries, and also which services you're using. But the fact of the matter is, the chances are you're likely not going to be able to access those services regardless of whichever ones they are. Next question here, why are VPNs allowed to be open until February in China? Fair question. You know, I imagine the reason is this. So again, China has a very complicated relationship with VPNs. The reason being, individuals are subject to heavy censorship. However, businesses that operate in China need to have international workforces. They need to have people who can log in remotely to their system. So China has had to allow some level of VPN spread throughout the country. However, what that requires is if you're doing business in China, in many cases, you have to register the fact that you're using a VPN. You have to raise your hand, say, I am, you know, company XYZ, I'm going to be doing business in China, and we're going to be using such and such VPN. That the government then gives you permission to use these encrypted tunnels, these secure tunnels, for your employees to access these corporate systems. Now, on the surface, that is just simply a registration system. But what it really is it gives the Chinese government an opportunity to take a look at which of your connections are using what technologies, and we all know at this point how intelligence services work. It gives them a great target of which systems to try and break and which connections to try and break. And this actually raises another really important point that I want to get to before I forget, is that a VPN is not a silver bullet. Just because you're using a VPN does not mean that you are 100% secure, because VPNs, like any other technology and any other technology company, are subject to whatever demands of whatever country's government they're operating in. So if you are a US-based VPN and the US government comes to you and says, I want to look at the traffic of company XYZ, you're not going to be able to fight that request. So companies doing business in China that have to register their VPNs, it puts a bullseye on their back for the government to potentially try and either break that encryption or spy on their communications in some other way. So in response to the question, I think the reason the new law won't take effect until February is there is this dual system in China where if you want to use VPNs, you have to register them. Next question here is, if a VPN is open after the deadline in China, what will happen to the people who use it? Will they be arrested? Well, you know, certainly China has a problematic record when it comes to human rights abuses and arresting people and prosecuting people for publishing controversial sentiments online. But when it comes to VPNs, certainly there could be intelligence value in monitoring somebody's VPN connection if they're already a target of some sort of investigation. My understanding is they're not just going to go slap handcuffs on people who are using VPNs. They simply block them. Again, unless you are a target of an investigation, in which case, if you think your VPN is still working but it's actually not, that's the way a lot of intelligence services work. They would like you to think your encryption still works when in fact it doesn't. But for the vast majority of people, what's going to happen is your VPN just simply won't work. And again, the way this is done, and this is kind of just a crude representation of it, is when you use your VPN and you exit the country and you hop to another computer somewhere and then to these services, what's happening is you're creating a traffic pattern that can be fingerprinted. So it's actually trivial for countries like China or Russia, or the US for that matter, that run these gateways, these internet gateways, to identify, hey, that person's using VPN traffic. We're going to block that. Corporations do this all the time. They want to make sure people aren't, downloading, BitTorrent files and things like that on corporate networks. So they have very simple tools for fingerprinting. Hey, this person isn't just accessing the internet. This person is running a VPN. We should block that person's connection. It's the same way it works for countries as well. Question here is, do people in China realize they don't have great internet freedom? I'm not a China expert, but from what I do know, yes, of course. People understand that the internet is being censored. There's varying levels of understanding about what that actually means. But in China, there is, until now at least, there have been a lot of people who have been able to get around the Great Firewall through the use of VPNs and other technologies. And you have things like cyber cafes. It's not like there's no internet in China at all. It's just heavily censored. And people know that, and some people have been able to get around it. But again, that's kind of with a wink and a nod from the Chinese government allowing that to happen. Question here is, how fast do you think underground VPNs will pop up? Well, this is a good question, and it gets to the heart of how does the Chinese government, or the Russian government for that matter, how do they actually filter these things? How do they actually block VPNs? Of course, there's a whole class of VPNs that are that are public and are very famous. And those are going to be pretty easy. Those are URLs that you can block. Those are IP addresses that you can block. But what this viewer is asking is, what if it's a new VPN? What if it's an underground VPN that isn't on any of these radars? The answer to that question is, that's going to be a lot harder for the sensors to spot. So my answer to this question is probably very soon, if not already. There are already lesser known VPNs, underground VPNs, things like that. But it's a very good question because these censorship schemes are not omnipresent. They can't censor everything because you have to know what to censor. If it's underground VPN, they won't be able to do that. We're getting a lot of great questions here. Thank you for sending these in. Please keep them coming. Will changing the DNS, the domain name system settings, allow users in those countries to bypass government censorship? Well, it depends. What happens with these VPNs, this viewer is right, what you're doing with a VPN is you're changing your DNS setting. The VPN's doing that for you, and all that means is you're not going straight from my computer to google.com. I'm going from my computer to the VPN computer, then to google.com, and that requires a change of DNS settings. Domain name system just means what you type into your browser to get to the website you're trying to go to. Problem with this is, and I've researched this, is that part of the way this filtering works for the Great Firewall and other censorship schemes is VPN services have a known range, typically, of IP addresses that they use. So what the Great Firewall and other technologies do is they block those IPs. So you can change your DNS to go to the VPN, but if that IP is being blocked, the effect is the same. Question here is, do VPN providers collect and distribute user information? This is a good question. A lot of companies in the VPN space, especially the paid versions, the free versions, do collect and sell information typically, or sell ads. A lot of these companies are privacy-centric companies. They know that if you're going to pay $10 a month or whatever for these services, that you want and expect a degree of anonymity and privacy. And they do give you that. If you don't want Comcast, which is your home internet provider, tracking everything you do, using a VPN is very effective. It does anonymize you to a certain degree. Here's the problem, though. If a law enforcement agency or an intelligence service knows that you're using that VPN and that company is in a country where they have leverage, they can simply go to that company, even if it collects no user information, and say, I want the encryption keys for your service so I can spy on this connection. And as we saw through the Edward Snowden disclosures, if you're a company doing business in one of these countries, you have no choice but to say yes. So that's really the problem, and why I say VPNs are great. They have a really legitimate purpose, but you have to be aware that they're not a silver bullet. Question here is, are there alternatives to access an unrestricted internet other than VPNs? VPNs are the best way. I'm not an expert on this particular, on this particular question, but I will say this: VPNs are the primary way. The Tor browser is another way, which is called onion routing. It's not really a VPN, but it functions kind of the same way. The whole idea here is this, is that if your VPN is blocked, as one viewer mentioned, there will be underground VPNs that pop up. There also is the Tor browser and the Tor operating system, the Tails operating system. And what these systems do is, the whole point is to access a computer outside of the country where the internet is being censored, and then go to the site that you ultimately want to go to. There are a few different ways to do that. Onion routing or VPNs are one of them. So I don't want viewers to think that just because these rules are going into place, that all of a sudden nobody can ever access services outside of that country that are banned. It just gets a lot harder. And again, one of the reasons people have been able to access banned sites in China and Russia, but especially in China, is because the government understands that VPNs are a vital part of international business. Question here is, why is Russia having the upper hand in cyber attacks? Not really sure how that question relates to this topic. This isn't a hacking topic. This is another image of internet users in Russia. In regard to this question, why is Russia having the upper hand in cyber attacks? I wouldn't say that Russia is gaining the upper hand in cyber attacks. I will say we're hearing a lot more about it now because Russia used to be a very stealth adversary, absolutely on par with the U.S. in many regards. Any national security official will tell you that. The problem is, after the invasion of Crimea a couple years back and the sanctions imposed on Russia, cybersecurity experts say they just saw an explosion in Russian hacking activity, which was kind of a way to say to the world, hey, we're still here and we're still a threat. Question here is, we're getting some very good questions today. Thank you. Thanks everybody for writing in. Trying to rip through these as fast as I can. What about CyberGhost? It's an EU-based VPN. It's bound to follow the EU Data Protection Act, with the UK being the only EU country opting out of the act. As regular viewers of the show will know, I'm not in the business of recommending specific technologies typically over another, but what the viewer is raising is a really important point. Where your VPN service is located matters a whole lot, because as I say over and over on the show, and should be obvious, to many of us at this point, if you're using a VPN that's located in the EU and you are coming under suspicion by American law enforcement, European law enforcement, anybody that's in the Five Eyes, these are all governments that have leverage and have ways to potentially look at that traffic. And this isn't just fear-mongering. This isn't just pie-in-the-sky stuff. Anytime you're using a security technology, you do have to remember it does put a target on your back, because what it does is it funnels your traffic through one central choke point. That might be a great choke point. That might be a heavily encrypted choke point. The problem becomes if somebody wants badly enough to get into those connections, where it's based matters a lot. That's why you'll see some of these VPNs located in Hong Kong or Panama or in some non-extradition countries, because that is designed to give users a degree of comfort that the home country's government won't demand that the encryption have a backdoor in it. Question here is, in countries where internet access appears to be free and open, how anonymous or not is our online activity? Another really good question. It depends on how you define anonymous. What I like to say on this show all the time is, I'm never going to be one to say, don't use your home internet service. You've got to go through all these different tools like a Tor browser and VPN and do all this stuff to get to the internet. For regular people, it's just not necessary. What it's going to do is add time. VPNs are not, there is a cost to using a VPN, and there is a cost to using the Tor browser. It slows down your internet experience. So for most people, I never say just go do that just because. However, I will say, in response to this question, your online activity is not anonymous. It's when you're entering information into certain websites, like when you go to google.com, and you're using Comcast internet at your home. Comcast knows you went to google.com. Comcast does not know what you just typed into google.com, because that communication is encrypted. But when you're searching the web and you're searching google.com and you're typing in search phrases, your internet provider may know some of that as well. So in response to this question of is it anonymous or not, it's absolutely not anonymous. You just have to trust that those companies, the internet providers, are doing the right things with your data. And as we've talked about on this show before, there is a move in Congress to let internet providers sell more of that information or let advertisers access it. And that's really something that hasn't been done before because those companies have unique visibility into your online activity. So it's not anonymous at all, but there are steps you can take to add a level of anonymity. Question is, can't people in China and Russia use Tor, or is that similar to a VPN? Again, another good question. They can use Tor. You can install a VPN in China. You can install Tor in China. But what the Chinese censors do is they will take internet IP addresses of any known servers that are running these services. So for Tor, for example, they will block certain Onion router servers connected to Tor. It's going to be a little bit harder because Tor computers are individual computers. Nevertheless, that's how the Great Firewall works. It isn't just you plug in a name and say block Tor. You're blocking individual nodes and individual types of communication. So you're allowed to get the software in many cases. It's just a matter of will it work or not. And this plays into the big decisions by Apple and other large tech companies. Apple has caught a ton of heat over the past couple of weeks for agreeing to China's demand to remove VPN applications, from the App Store in China. This is a big deal because in response to this question, that means you can't even access those apps. You can't even download them through the legitimate channels. You can always jailbreak your phone, get these apps from jailbreak application stores and things like that. But for ordinary users who don't want to do all that, that just means that that Apple has participated in, understandably because they want to do business in China, with a government censorship scheme, that removes the ability of ordinary people to easily access these tools. Can you use the internet from a cafe or store in China and Russia? Of course. I mean, these are, the internet exists in these countries the same way it does here. It's just that things that you're able to access on it, are not the same. And this is, one of the great examples of it is this site, the Great Firewall of China.org. You could type in, you could type in your favorite URL there and see if it's banned in China. I think that's a pretty useful demonstration. Wow, a lot of great questions here. Thank you for all these. My son was using a VPN to communicate with me on Facebook. He is now blocked. He lives and works in Hangzhou. Since WeChat is only available by using a smartphone, I have an old flip phone, is my only recourse to purchase a smartphone? This is an interesting question. I don't know exactly how to answer it, but I will say this. The cellular networks and the landline internet networks are different. So if you're accessing the internet via your home computer versus your smartphone, there will be, very likely, different filters on both of those technologies. So if you're using an app like WeChat, and it's on a smartphone, and it's working, of course, and you're able to make those communications effectively, there may be ways around it to install that kind of application on your desktop. I'm not, an expert on WeChat, but what I will say is there are different filtering mechanisms for different types of internet connections. And in this case, if a smartphone application is working for you and it's not blocked, you may have to get a smartphone or even a cheap one, to make those connections work if the desktop communications are blocked. It's unfortunate, but likely the way a lot of people have to adapt to these new rules. Question here is, what are the most popular VPNs right now? Again, I don't really go into specific product recommendations on this show. They're very easy to find online. There's some very good rankings. Again, but a lot of this is going to come down to A, what you can afford. These are not free services in many cases. At least the best ones tend not to be. And who exactly are you trying to shield your communications from? This is another issue that I like to talk about a lot. Just going on a VPN, just paying money for a VPN, does not mean the NSA can't track you. Does not mean the Chinese government can't track you. The way we use the internet these days is we log into cloud-based services like Google or Amazon or Twitter or whatever. So if you use a VPN and you go to your Gmail account and you log in as you are still creating a very traceable record of who you are and what your activities are online. It just may not be the IP of your home computer, but otherwise you're very traceable. So what I advise people a lot is know who you're trying to protect your information from. If it's a foreign government, if it's a domestic government, wherever you live, your challenge sets and your security risks are going to be very different from the vast majority of people for whom a lot of these technologies will just kind of be an unnecessary burden in many cases. Question is, will this block SSL VPNs too? How will they distinguish between legitimate HTTPS traffic from VPN traffic? What this viewer is asking is, how does the Great Firewall and how will the Russian system distinguish between legitimate encrypted traffic and VPN traffic? You know, it's not really an easy answer, but what I will say is that, you know, obviously there are lots and lots of legitimate reasons, lots and lots of reasons why these countries will still allow encrypted information to leave their networks. Again, you go to gmail.com, that is an encrypted connection between my computer and Google servers. You know, Russia and China, that's not what they're looking to block, although, of course, Google and other sites are blocked in some of these places. What they're looking for is there's a very simple tool called you know, deep packet inspection or even deep session inspection. These are technologies that allow companies and governments to examine the packets flowing across their networks and fingerprint what type of traffic is this. So is this a user interacting with a website and entering a Gmail account, or is this a user logging into a VPN and again downloading BitTorrents or something like that? That's not that hard to fingerprint, especially again when you consider that VPNs and other anonymization technologies typically use a set of standard IP addresses which are then blocked. So that's kind of you know, that's kind of the answer to that. Is Tor still on the Apple App Store in China? You know, I don't know the answer to that, so I will skip over that. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer. With that, we've got a ton of great questions today. I really want to thank you know, everybody for writing in. This obviously is a topic that is important to a lot of us, and regular viewers of the show will know I try to give you some practical advice for the everyday internet user, while also letting you know there are some tools out there that you can use to protect your privacy and security, but it's all a question of, is it worth the cost to you? In this case, the bottom line advice for me is this. You know, if you live in China, if you live in Russia, and these rules are going to come down and are going to impact you, there will be a time of adjustment. I mean, we have not seen countries clamp down in this way yet. It's a kind of a slow tightening of the screws here. But as one viewer mentioned, you know, underground services and activist services, you know, exist for this very reason. You know, the reason you don't want the government in control of all of these technologies is because you want ways around repressive regimes. You want ways around censorship, and you want ways around surveillance. So there are and will continue to be tools that will allow you to access an uncensored internet. It just gets a lot harder, and it's just cat and mouse game between activists and governments. But certainly, these new rules in China and Russia are a troubling development for privacy, human rights, and, you know, and security worldwide. This is a topic we're likely to revisit on a future show. If you want to send us some more questions, we're at Technology on Twitter. That's the Bloomberg Technology webpage. And I am at Jordan R1000, Jordan, the letter R1000. And as always, we appreciate your viewership. We hope you enjoy the show and learn something. And you can feel free to visit us at bloomberg.com/technology. There you'll find links to archived episodes of the show, as well as another web show by my colleague Mark Gurman called Gadgets with Gurman, as well as a great podcast we do called Decrypted. So thank you very much for watching. This has been Digital Defense, and we'll see you all next week at noon Eastern.